Hey guys, so back to basics a little bit with this video today. This is going to be kind of a more off the cuff, kind of unscripted video than I've been doing, kind of the way I used to do videos. And I've brought back a subject that was actually in one of my very first videos. If you've been with me for a long time now, you may have seen this. I did a video on this in 2017 that was just a teardown of what was then, I called it a 15-year-old PC. We'll get into that, the actual history of this machine, in a little more detail after the break. But for now, what I'm going to be doing with this today is I'm going to be turning this into an all-in-one retro gaming PC. That's my goal for this. I've already done a couple of upgrades on it, but I've been going through it, I've been looking at it, and you know, it is an old PC now, and it does seem like it needs probably a few repairs and a little bit of maintenance. So I'm going to be tackling some of those projects today. A couple of the things that I'm going to be doing. I've got capacitors here for the motherboard, and I've got capacitors here for the power supply. And you see that's a lot of capacitors. So this probably will be a multi-day project. Of course, for you, it's just going to be a couple of minutes. But we'll get into that, and I'll kind of go through everything about this PC after the break. All right, so first, just a basic little history about this PC. If you didn't see that earlier video, this will be all new to you. If you saw that earlier video, there might be a few differences with what I said in that video, and that's because, you know, I remember the important stuff in life. What PC equipment I had when is not all that important, and yes, I do forget things. I've gone through now, I've looked at some of my old photos, I've tried to kind of date things, and the history of this PC. My very first PC was a Packard Bell piece of junk, you know, crappy PC from 1992. It was a 486 SX25. I've talked about that in other videos. Had 4 megabytes of RAM, 170 meg hard drive, and basically no graphics card or a crappy graphics card. Could play basic DOS games, maybe some Windows 95 games. That's about it. At some point, I decided that I wanted to upgrade that. I first upgraded the RAM. I upgraded the hard drive. That's about all I could do in that original case. Once it got to be kind of the late 90s, I decided, well, I want a new graphics card. And in order to do that, I needed a new motherboard, which meant I needed a new case. So I went out, I got those things. Honestly, I must have also upgraded the RAM at the same time. I think I probably got one stick of RAM, like 64 or 128 megs, something like that. And I'm not totally sure if in that first upgrade of that PC, if I got this motherboard at the same time. I may have, but I also may have gotten this motherboard a little later. Anyway, that was in a nice stylish white case with frosted plexiglass on the front. It still had some of the components of the Packard Bell in it. I do remember the last thing I ever upgraded in that machine was the floppy drive. And it's kind of a ship of Theseus thing. When does it just become a brand new machine? Well, you could say this machine is still a direct descendant of that machine, at least. I'm not totally sure what prompted me to get this case. I think it was probably just the styling. You know, styling had moved on at that point. The white case was kind of cool for the time. It kind of was an evolution of the beige and gray cases that we had before that. But, you know, in the late 90s, very early 2000s, aluminum was the thing. I wanted an aluminum case, so I got this. At that point, I had the 8-bit motherboard that you're about to see in there. I went through several graphics cards. I know at one point I had a Matrox Millennium. I had a Diamond Stealth 3D. I had a Voodoo 3 at one point, probably with the Millennium. I don't remember exactly. But in any case, at a certain point, I settled on this configuration. This has an 8-bit KT7A non-RAID motherboard in it, a Palette GeForce 4 Ti 4200, a Sound Blaster Live 5.1, and it had an 80 gig hard drive, which I think was the upgrade that I had in my white PC still. So I think that hard drive kind of survives from that first upgrade to the white case. So let's take a look at it let's take a look at what's in there now, what kind of problems I'm having, and what I'm going to do about it. Special thanks to Toasty on badcaps.net and Watson on vogons.org for the work that they did in documenting their own recaps. This video took a lot less time without having to try to figure out which caps to order to begin with. Alright, so right off the bat here I can show you a couple of things that I've done to this PC already, and they're not really to the PC, but you know, the periphery, I guess. First of all, I realized when I was opening this thing up and trying to work on it, I didn't really have a good VGA monitor with a VGA input to test things with. I had one that I used to use in older videos. You may have seen it, a little Hans G crappy monitor. But, you know, it was a 16:9 and it didn't really switch aspect ratios well and stuff. So I wanted a 4:3 monitor. I bought this thing for 20 bucks. It was intended just to test things with. It's one of those things, I paid 20 bucks and I love it. And it ended up kind of putting me down this road of also buying the matching keyboard. They're both compact, as you can see. This is not a compact PC, this is just home built. But I do like compact. You may have seen that. I bought a Desk Pro XL for a series of videos a little while ago. I had a compact R3000T laptop. Post HP, as I believe both of these are, the kind of silver era of compact, but you know, they were still pretty good at that time. And this is period appropriate stuff. Apparently 2003, which is kind of the year that I first put a lot of this stuff together, the pictures that I have of it are dated 2003. That was apparently the first year that LCD screens overtook CRTs as the primary or the most popular option for monitors. And I was using an LCD at that time. So, period accurate. This keyboard is just a rubber dome keyboard. It doesn't feel great or anything, but again, period accurate. I was using my IBM Model M at that time, but that was kind of anachronistic. Mechanical keyboards really became popular in later years, but I really like the look of this keyboard. Silver, it's got these weird functions at the top. I don't have a driver for this. I may be able to download one and get those things working. I'll find out later. But anyway, I was trying to kind of avoid starting this computer again, but just to show you, hopefully, one of the things that's going on, I'll kind of load up the BIOS here, and I'm not doing direct capture here, both to keep the video simple, and also, I honestly kind of just like seeing things in the context of the whole computer. So let me just try to start this computer up and hope it doesn't blow up on me. We'll see what happens. If you can hear that beeping, I honestly don't know why it does that. I've replaced the battery for the CMOS. It seems to work, but... So just zooming in on this a little bit so you can see better. Plus or minus 5% on these voltages. 11.52, that's just in spec. I've seen this just the other day as low as 11.27, probably depending on what I'm doing. And 11.27 is clearly out of spec, and I am having a bit of instability with this machine. Hence the capacitor replacements for the power supply. Both the power supply, well, pretty much everything in this machine is from the capacitor-plagued era. I'm not generally someone that just automatically recaps everything, but in this case, I think it's warranted, especially when I see already voltages like this, but this is not doing anything. When I'm doing something, this can get lower than that. So it's about time. And just so you can see, I didn't mention it before, but this is an Athlon XP 1700 plus CPU. Totally period correct for that 2002, 2003 period. And should be able to run pretty much anything I want it to run just fine. Let's see if there's... Aha! Well, what do you see there? I do already have an SSD in here. I'll show you that. And it is working, but again, getting a little instability, and I don't know where that's coming from. I think the capacitors are definitely one possible culprit, but who knows? In a machine where you're kind of changing and modernizing certain things, but not others, you know, it could be really coming from anywhere. But basically the SSD is working. I'll show you that in a little while. And I'll show you the SSD as well. What else here? No, I think that's about it. If anybody does see anything in here, just, you know, while I'm scrolling through that you think I should have set differently, let me know. I honestly don't remember what all these settings are. I've tried to Google some of them. I've set the ones that can be faster. I think my DRAM timing is probably could be faster, but, you know, again, I tried different settings and was getting instability, so I went back to the fail safes, but I'm still getting some instability. So it probably wasn't that, but, you know. All right, let's, I'll save and exit here, and then I'll open this thing up and show you the inside and then get to work. All right, let's get this opened up. Like I said, this is not the first time I'm opening this up. In the last couple months, I've had this opened and running, actually, for quite a while. I've got these two fans on the side here that I need to disconnect. And yeah, don't worry about my cable management, because this, this is just kind of the way it was back then. We didn't do a lot of cable management. All right, I'm gonna have to go off camera for a second and disconnect these fans. Okay, so you've seen this stuff too. I talked about this in my first video on this machine. This is soundproofing material. Fans in those days were not as quiet as they are today, and neither were hard drives. I don't know how much this stuff helped, but I used it. So let's just start removing stuff. My little TP-Link wireless networking card. And yes, this does work under Windows XP. That's one of the reasons why I bought it. It's not a great idea. And it doesn't work that well, honestly. There are probably better ways to get files onto an old computer like this. So I probably just will not reinstall this. And here's my Sound Blaster Live 5.1. It is the 5.1 digital, which should mean, in fact, yes, this is the later, better version of this card. According to Wikipedia, the Sound Blaster Live 5.1 digital Dell OEM SBO220. So it's the later improved model with the EMU 10 or 10K1 chip and the EAX Direct Sound 3D acceleration. So yeah, this is the better card. This is not a bad card. I have not had any problems with this card, and it does even work in DOS. And by the way, some of you may be wondering why I have a Dell OEM Sound Blaster in my home-built PC, and that's because that's just what Newegg was selling at the time, and it was cheaper. I've checked it now and verified this, but I do kind of remember at the time that the only difference was the packaging. So it was a good deal, and it is still a good card. But that's why I have a Dell card in there. All right, now lastly, at least as far as the cards go, is my GeForce 4 Ti 4200. Someone pointed out in my earlier video that they could see bulging caps on this card. I didn't notice it before that, but I looked at it later and they were right. So I've already recapped this card. This card is fine. These are all new caps. They're good quality caps. Nichicon, I think some Panasonics on there. There's not that many, but yeah, it's all recapped. I even did the little surface mount cap, and totally fine. And by the way, when I did remove those old caps, I tested them out, and I think all but 3 were wildly out of spec. To the point that I can't believe it even worked. All right, I've brought the camera around a little bit so you can see here. This is my IDE to SATA adapter. And this is the second one that I tried. And it is working. I do have it's a 128 gig SATA SSD in there. I'll tell you the story of that. I've been trying to upgrade that hard drive for years now to a SATA drive, and just I couldn't get it to work. I had another IDE to SATA converter, and I had another SATA SSD. It was a PNY SSD. I'll show you the SATA converter on the screen now, and it just didn't work, and I didn't like, it wasn't being recognized by the BIOS at all. I eventually thought, well, okay, I'll try a different converter. Ended up getting this one from eBay. Both were from eBay, about, you know, $8 each, not a big purchase. Tried it out. Again, didn't work. I thought, what is, well, you know, maybe my motherboard, you know, some of these things just aren't compatible. Whatever. I'm just not going to be able to do it. I still have the old hard drive in here, and that was working fine, so I was just using that. But one day, you know, in a fit of the why nots, and again, like a lot of things with retro computers, you just got to do trial and error until it works, and try some stuff until there's nothing left to try. I just tried a different cheap SSD, 128 gig Inland SSD. Inland is Micro Center's store brand. It cost me $15. I already had it lying around for some other purpose. I tried it with this, and what do you know? It worked right off the bat. BIOS recognized it, recognizes all 128 gigs of it. Windows recognizes it. DOS, of course, only recognizes what DOS recognizes. You know, FAT16, you know, 2 gigs, whatever, per partition. But it's working fine. So you just got to find the right combination of these things. All right, well, I'm just going to keep disconnecting stuff from the motherboard here. Everything needs to go, kind of. So I have this video record of where everything connects. And I don't normally wear one of these, but yes, I am wearing an anti-static wristband now, at least. It could be too late, but you know, I've worked on this thing so many times without that. And one thing I do want to do is take a picture of how all the panel connectors and stuff are hooked up. Just do that on my phone. Okay, I think the power supply, at least, well, I mean, I didn't need to do that. I didn't need to do these for that, but just trying to get ready for everything here. But at this point, I should be able to get the power supply out. So let me do that first. Okay, so I believe this thing just comes out with thumb screws. There's just a panel holding it in. One thing, it's just, as I'm taking this out, I did originally try to replace this power supply. Didn't really work out. I bought another one on eBay, the exact same power supply, and whoever sent it to me was not paying attention, ended up sending me a Deere power supply instead, which is not the same as what's in here. This is an Antec SL400, and I'll show you why I wanted to either replace it with the exact same one or recap it after I get it out of here. But something is still holding it in. What is it? Maybe these two? What is that? Yeah, I think my fan controller is going to need a little attention after this, because I have no idea how that was just connected, but I'll figure that out later. Okay, so this is my Antec Smart Power SL400 400 watt power supply. 400 watts was a lot in those days. There aren't many computers that actually required 400 watts. I doubt mine did either. I bought it to give myself some headroom because, you know, power supplies are not rated for just one rail. They're split over several different rails. You've got the 3.3 volt, 5 volt, plus 12 volt. And yeah, I think modern power supplies don't necessarily have the minus 12 volt, and certain things look for that, even though I don't know if you can see this. I'll try and zoom this in a little bit. 0.8 amps on the minus 12 volts. So it's not like there's a lot of power there. But one thing there is a lot of power on is the 3.3 and 5 volt rails, which a modern power supply is not going to have that. 38 amps on the 5 volt rail. Modern power supply, even like a 600 watt power supply, you might get like 20 on the 5 volt rail. And that's just because PC specifications have changed. Modern PC hardware is using a lot more of the 12 volt rail. You see on here, we've only got 18 amps on the 12 volt rail. On a modern PC power supply, you know, that could be, well, it's going to be a lot higher. I haven't actually looked, but it's going to be a lot higher on the 12 volt, a lot lower on the 5 and the 3.3 volt. So if you have a retro PC, you really kind of want an older power supply to go with it, because they're going to be a lot more powerful on the rails that retro computers actually need. So I knew I wanted to I kind of originally just wanted to replace this for now, but most retro power supplies that are of any decent quality actually cost quite a bit of money. This seems to be kind of the only series that people have not discovered. And maybe one of the reasons for that is what I'm going through today, the capacitors. But I think that would have been true of a lot of power supplies in those days. This was made at the height of the capacitor plague. That was kind of the mid 90s or late 90s, I guess, to mid 2000s, when a lot of capacitors were going bad because somebody apparently stole the wrong formula and like gave it to a bunch of Chinese companies or something like that. But there were a lot of these capacitors made that ended up going out of spec really quickly, or were out of spec to begin with, and then just ended up getting worse and messing up everything else. So that's what's happened now to a lot of vintage electronics. And that's why so many of these things are going out of spec and need to have their capacitors replaced. All right, it's the next day now, and since I didn't do this yesterday, I feel like I probably should say a little bit about safety here. It may seem like I'm just rushing right into this and just, you know, trying to barrel through it. But in fact, this can be a little dangerous, working inside a power supply. What I'm saying is I don't want people to watch this video and then just think, oh, great, I'll go recap my power supply. No, like, look into it, make sure you have some idea how to keep yourself safe. Anyway, you'll see me test the main voltage capacitors when I turn over the board, and I'll test other places on the board for voltage as well. I don't think there's going to be any, but if there is, I do have my trusty little iFixit homemade capacitor discharger, which all you really need to do is short out capacitors in order to discharge them. But I made a nice heavy duty one that is going to be perfect for this purpose. So anyway, sure, recap your power supply, but make sure you know how to do it and do it safely. Anyway, let's crack on with this. And oh no, I'm about to break the warranty sticker. Can't even puncture it. Oh, there we go. Look at that. It just came right off. Just stick it back on there, see if I can get some warranty service. Ay. I'm not even drunk. Okay, the fan is probably connected in there somehow, so let's see. Okay. All right, well, you probably can't see this, but it is a horror show in there. I'll bring the camera around. Some of what you're seeing in there is just epoxy that they kind of just randomly seem to dump epoxy on stuff in these things. But like that is leaking electrolyte on top there. There's some leaking there. There's a lot leaking from this one. Yeah, you probably can't see that one. Just tip that up a little bit. Maybe you can see that a little better. There's a lot of electrolyte leaking out of the tops of these caps, and the ones that aren't leaking are definitely bulging. So yeah, this thing, I can't believe this thing is still working, to be honest, but it definitely is in need of a recap. All right, I've got the screws out, I've got the wiring harness out. Everything should be ready to flip the board over. Let's just see what happens here. I've also taken the fan out just to give myself a little extra room here. So, okay, so I've got the multimeter out, and I'm gonna just measure across the two big caps on the back of the board. It should be these two and these two. So let's just see. If I could hold this steady. Nothing there. Got nothing there. Yeah, so there's no voltage left in this power supply, and there shouldn't be. I just wanted to double check. Turns out this is no picnic trying to get these things out, but there's the first one out. And I'll see if I can zoom in on this, but yeah, hopefully you can see that. That is ugly. And let's test out the capacitance just out of curiosity. Sorry for the helicopter sound. I do live right next to an airport. So you saw the multimeter there switch from microfarads to MF, which often does also stand for microfarads, but in this case it's millifarads. So that's 2.28 millifarads, which is about 2,300 microfarads. This is a, you can't see this from there, but this is a 3,300 microfarad capacitor, so that's pretty far out of spec, as you'd expect. I suspect this will not be the worst one. Hey, so let me just talk a little bit about capacitors in general here. How I'm testing them, why I'm testing them that way, and what I mean when I say a capacitor is either in spec or out of spec. So this is an electrolytic capacitor, and that's basically all I'm dealing with today. Electrolytic capacitors have kind of a gel layer of electrolyte inside that's holding the two capacitive layers apart from each other at a certain set distance, and that's kind of what determines the capacitance. All electrolytic capacitors have kind of a rated shelf life. Even if you're not using them, they're eventually going to go bad in one way or another just through physical degradation. So there are different ways to see that happening. One is to just look and see if any electrolyte is leaking like this. In this case it is, so this is obviously a bad capacitor. It's going through some bad physical changes here that you don't want, and it's not going to be in spec no matter what. But even a capacitor that looks good, you take it out, you can measure it. If you measure the capacitance and it's beyond the rated tolerance of the capacitor, which in most cases for capacitors like this is going to be plus or minus 20% of the rated capacitance value. So for example, this is a 3,300 microfarad capacitor. 20% of that is 660. So if this is 660 microfarads high or low versus the 3,300 it's supposed to be, then it's out of spec and it should be replaced. Now, if a capacitor is drifting over time, which they all will, then eventually they're all going to need to be replaced anyway. So if I see that in my testing, if all the capacitors are high or all of them are low or whatever, then they really all needed to be replaced anyway, because they're just going to keep going in that direction. and that's due to the physical changes that are happening inside the capacitor. Now, theoretically, it's possible to kind of bring a capacitor back from the dead. Not from this level, but I have seen people who have, if you apply a small voltage to a capacitor, kind of get it back to life, get the juices flowing again in there. I mean, that's a metaphor, they don't actually move in there, but you can actually bring a capacitor back close to its spec. I don't have any way to do that. I don't have a way to apply voltage in small amounts to get the capacitors back up to where they should be one by one, and it seems like a lot of work anyway. So I'm just replacing all of these, testing them out afterwards, and you're going to hear me talk about whether or not they're actually in spec. Spoiler alert, this one is not. Well, that's the first two caps in. All right, well, there's the recap complete. Every single capacitor in here has been replaced, including I did the two big ones. So they're the old, well, there's one of the old ones. And hopefully now this thing is going to give me some good stable power. Just for fun, I'm going to go ahead and test all of the capacitors that I took out of it just to see what the worst one is. I'll show you that in just a second. Well, so it's day 3, 4, I don't even know anymore. It's taken me a lot longer to do this than I was expecting. Sorry for the beep here. But I did end up testing all the caps. My helping hands broke. It still works well enough to help me test caps. These ones over here, these caps were all out of spec. Some of them pretty drastically. These ones over here, these were in spec, including the big ones. I kind of figured I could have left them in. I could have left all of these in. But, they're all old. They're going to drift. The one kind of takeaway that I have is all the ones that are within spec, they all visually look fine. So that tells me something, but it's not the whole story, because of the ones that are bad, yeah, this one's bulging and leaking. All the ones that look bad are bad, but this little one looks fine. It's bad. A couple of these others, this one's not bulging or leaking. It's bad. So, bottom line, if a cap looks bad, it is bad and it needs to be replaced. But a cap can still look good and be bad. Okay, so hopefully ready to test here. I've got my green wire shorted. Not shorted. I've got the green wire connected to ground. I've got a case fan hooked up just for a little bit of load, and I've got my multimeter ready to, actually not ready, let's see. Now it's ready. Multimeter is ready just to test the 3 and 5 volt rails once they're, let me just get a better cable here. All right. So, moment of truth. I'm going to plug this thing in. It's off right now. And hopefully it works and doesn't blow up. Nothing is screwed in right now, so just in case I need to do anything. Let's see what happens. Well, it's running. I'll go ahead and measure the voltage. Okay, so on the 12 volt rail, we got 12.04 volts right now. So that's pretty much perfect. So I'd say that was successful. Now let's test, I said the 3 and 5 volt rails before. I meant the 5 and 12. Let's test the 5 volt. And on the 5 volt, we got 5.11, which is pretty close to perfect. It's not exact, you know, obviously, but that's within spec. So yeah, I'm happy with that. And it's not low. So that was the problem I was having before. All right, well, here's my 8-bit KT7A motherboard, non-RAID. This was considered a really good board at the time. It supported 133 megahertz frontside bus. That was the difference between the A version and the non-A. It has one AGP, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 PCI and 1 ISA slot, which is shared. So pretty good for a retro computer. If I do need an ISA card in there, I can use one. If I ever decide I want like a Sound Blaster 16 or something like that, or just some older oddball card, I don't know. I'm going to do a full inspection of the capacitors as much as I can visually. I know you can't see them all on camera right now, so I'm going to get the CPU and RAM out of the way, and then I'll look at the whole board and see. I'm recapping it either way. These boards do have a reputation for caps going bad, and again, just as I just showed you, just because a cap looks good doesn't mean it is good. So I'm just gonna, in this one instance, I don't normally do it, but I'm gonna preemptively recap the whole board, and then I'll test each capacitor as I take it out. Okay, and again, as I showed in my first video on this machine, 2 totally different RAM sticks with my own heat spreaders that I've added. And I don't remember who made these RAM sticks. They work fine together. In those days, you could do that. You could mix and match RAM. You didn't always get the best performance. You got the best performance of the worst of the sticks that you had. But these worked pretty good. I've never had any problem with them. I would take these heat spreaders off to kind of see and show you what they are, but I'm pretty sure that the way that I had to put them on, or the way I was supposed to put them on, was with these adhesive heat pads that they came with, so they're probably not coming off, and I'm not going to try to force them. Anyway, let me just get the CPU cleaned up here, and then I can look at the caps. All right, so looking at the board, I've looked at every capacitor that I can see, and visually, everything looks good. I'm going to guess that probably a few of them have drifted out of spec, and so it's just going to be a good idea to just replace all of them, and then I can be confident that nothing's going to happen. I mean, I've been thinking that this board is a ticking time bomb for years now, so let's just take care of it. But, you know, yeah, I mean, it all looks good to me from here, but I'll test them all. All right, there's the first cap out. Yeah, if you have a desoldering gun, this goes a lot quicker, but anyway, let's test this out. All right, so this is a JackCon 1000 microfarad capacitor. Let's see. 1050, that's within spec. Hopefully I'm not going to regret recapping this whole thing. That's just the first one. If there's even one capacitor that's out of specification on this board, it will have been worth it. All right, a little bit of a progress report. It's day, I don't know, 7, something like that. It's taken me a lot longer to finish this than I thought it would, as is often the case. I do have about half the board done. It takes a lot longer when you're just using a regular soldering iron, and I did actually order a desoldering pump. Just one of those manual things. It's electric. Hopefully it'll actually work. I mean, I don't mean something like this. This is just a solder sucker. So we'll see how that goes, if it goes any faster. But I do have about half the board done. I was hoping to get this whole video, everything done, before I go on my next trip for work. That's not going to happen. I'm leaving tomorrow. So far, I've tested all the caps that I've taken out. I don't know if you can see. Yeah, you can. Up here, these are, well, okay, first, these are the caps that were actually still in spec. There's a couple here that are out of spec. A few, 3 to be precise right now. These 3 were out of spec, not by much, but enough to, warrant replacement. So I am glad that I'm going through this. These ones that are still in spec, some of them are barely in spec, so they are drifting, and this board eventually would have gone bad. The one odd thing as I've been going through is it looks like someone, and it could have been me, did a partial recap on this board a long time ago. It's, looking at the solder joints, they're not great, and there's still some flux residue on the board. It is entirely possible that I did a partial recap, at least of certain caps on, well, that sort of partial recap is, I don't know why. I don't know why I would have only recapped a few. I don't know if it was actually me, but I bought this board new, and it was probably me, and I just forgot. But if I did recap it, the funny thing is, these are a couple of those caps that looked like they'd been replaced, and they are out of spec. So the new caps are actually worse. I think one of these was one of the old ones on the board, but anyway, it's good that I'm recapping it, and I'm kind of doing it right this time if I did do it before. So here's the recap, pretty much complete. I just have some cleaning up to do, my OCD about some of these not quite being flush with the board or not quite straight. I'm just gonna turn over the board one more time, get some of these solder joints cleaned up a little bit, get the whole board, back of the board cleaned up. Everything went pretty well. It was a little slower than I had originally intended, and I can't probably zoom in far enough on this camera to show you this, but there was one spot where I almost took a trace off the board, and this is one reason why I don't normally like to just recap for the sake of recapping. You can obviously mess things up worse, and I almost did that. Put a little solder on it just to make sure it's strong, and I think it's okay. Other than that, everything went well, and I think this board should be pretty good now. There were 3 caps out of spec, and they were all, strangely enough, the 1500 microfarad caps. Most of the rest of these were all technically in spec, but they were all drifting. They're all getting pretty close. Let me just see if I can find a good example here. Here's another 2200. 2577. So 20% tolerance from 2200, that would be 2640 is the limit. This is 2560. So yeah, drifting up there. And I probably could have gotten another couple of years out of this board before I started really having problems, but let me just get it cleaned up and then I'll get it put back in the computer. So I ended up cutting this part out of the video already, but at one point I had a Lian Li case that was actually kind of a better version of this case. This case is kind of a knockoff of the Lian Li. The reason that one of the reasons that I kept this case over the Lian Li, I ended up putting the Lian Li to the curb, which was a mistake, but we'll not dwell on that. But one of the reasons I kept this is this front I/O situation that it's got here. It has pretty much everything you could need for front I/O. It's got USB, sound stuff. It's got a game port, and it even has a Thunderbolt port. The problem is, and maybe you guys can help me with this. Let me turn this around and let me just reposition the camera a bit. Some of you may have seen this earlier. This is the cable that's coming from those front ports. Let me see if that's in focus there. And it looks like some kind of weird giant parallel or SCSI port or something, and it goes on the back here. And I honestly don't remember this, but from what I gather, this had another cable of some kind coming out the back that would then be routed back through into the motherboard, and that's why I'm actually missing some gates, I'll bet. But I seem to not have the other part of this cable anymore. If any of you guys know where I can get something like that, I would guess whatever connects to this has to have all of the individual USB and sound card connectors and all that. And I don't know where to get it. I don't even know what it's called. I've tried Googling it and it's just nothing comes up. So for now, those front I/O ports just don't do anything, but they could if I just had the right cable, I guess. Anyway. And by the way, in case you're curious, this is the fan controller taken out of the case. It's a pretty simple device. It's really just this front panel here and then 6 fan connectors and a Molex connector with another Molex connector so you don't lose a Molex connector. And as you can see, it has kind of a drive cage here so you don't waste a bay. I don't need that bay, so I've got nothing in it, but yeah, pretty simple device. And because why not, I took out the CD-ROM drive to show you what it is. This is a Light-On 5246S. It's a 52X CD-RW drive, so this was pretty advanced at the time. You see the manufacture date, March 2003, and it 52 times speed CD-RW drive at that time. Not a lot of people had those at that time. All right, now the part of the process that I've actually been dreading the most is this. It's putting the power supply back in. These cases, that's the one kind of weird bit of cable management they have is there's this like a bridge here that you're able to put some of the wires over and have go different places, and that way, theoretically the motherboard is left uncovered. It never actually works, but it does just end up being a huge pain in the ass getting all this stuff in there properly. So let me see. Well, I'm blocking the camera. Sorry about that. In fact, let me get on the other side here. All right, well, hopefully everything power related as well as IDE connectors and all that is back together the way it should be. I actually had to go back to my original video from when I was taking this apart just to verify certain things, but like for example, this blue and black wire coming from the power supply fan, I had no idea where that connected, but I found it in the early video. Got all these fan connectors connected, hopefully the way they were, and now I'm just going to start putting the cards back in. By the way, I think I figured out one thing with this cable. I was wrong thinking that it looped back into the motherboard. I think what there actually is there's another cable that just comes out the back here and just connects to the rear ports, so that it's essentially just giving you a pass through for the rear ports into the front. So, you know, still better than nothing. I'd still love to have that cable if anybody knows where I can get one that would fit this particular weird giant connector. All right, so first, since I know exactly where it goes, I'll put the graphics card. All right, and then I don't know exactly where I had this sound card, but I don't think it really matters anyway. By the way, there might be those of you wondering why I didn't recap this card. Obviously, there's a lot of capacitors here too, and some of these are likely suspect. And my response to that would be, good question. Well, but there are a couple of good answers anyway, I think. First of all, these cards are like 20 bucks. If this card ever dies, it's not expensive to replace it. My time is worth money. It took me a couple of days each to recap the power supply and the motherboard. I think that amount of time to me is probably worth 20 bucks. But, you know, someday I might do it just for sentimental reasons or because I'm bored and want a project. But, you know, again, it's a cheap card. It's not going to take down the whole system. The even this GeForce card is actually quite a bit more expensive than one of these Sound Blaster Lives. So I'm not too worried about this, but, you know, I did notice a few sound anomalies when I was playing around with this a few weeks ago. And if I keep noticing those in different games, then yeah, I'll probably do something about it. But it's not really that important right now. And with any retro equipment, it's always going to be kind of a work in progress. My goal today, or the past couple weeks, has been to get this thing to a state where it's not going to blow up. And hopefully I've done that. But the sound card, it works, and that's the most important thing. And, you know, getting it perfect can probably wait a little bit. And now, now that I've put the card in, I don't know where this goes. I'll take this back out and get this connected and get it put back in. And that should pretty much do it as far as the hardware goes. You know, one of the things that I've always liked about this PC, and this was actually a goal that I had at the time, was how kind of colorful it is. It's not just a bunch of green PCBs, black fans. That was kind of a trend, I guess, at the time. I don't think a lot of people made much of an effort with their expansion cards, but, you know, I've got the brown motherboard. Brown. At least it's different than green. I've got the purple graphics card. I've got the black sound card. I've got the orange CPU fan, the pink case fan. I don't know how I ended up with that. And then on both the sides and the front, I've got blue LED clear case fans, and of course the aluminum and the black. We were all kind of trying to get away from the whole beige gray thing, and the blue on the memory modules as well. So yeah, it was all kind of just a reaction to the boring kind of monotone PCs we all had for a while with the all green PCBs inside, and, you know, the kind of nondescript fans. And that's kind of continued today. That grew then into the whole RGB thing and LED lighting and all that kind of stuff. All right, well, moment of truth. I'm going to test it out here. This is the first time I'm going to be turning it on fully, certainly since doing the motherboard. This is not my ideal setup here and not the way I'm going to have it set up, but this is just for testing. I admit I'm a little nervous here, so I'm kind of standing off to the side. Let's see what happens. That beeping is the fan controller, actually. I can probably figure that out. Might help if I turned on the monitor. Hey, we got Windows. I do not have the sound connected. I believe, I mean, it should work, but I just forgot to connect it. I'll test that out in another minute. But certainly appears to be working. All right, so we're going to try this one more time, and this time you should be able to hear that sweet Windows 98 startup sound. I've turned down some of the fans just a little bit, and just to help with the sound. I think it might be beeping sometimes when I start it up because I had the CPU fan turned all the way down. I turned it up a little bit, just that one fan. Anyway, let's listen to this sound. So you heard it kind of breaking up a little bit there. It doesn't normally do that in most other situations, but it kind of always does on the Windows 98 startup. So I don't know. Maybe I'll replace the caps at some point, or maybe I'll just try a different card at some point. But it is working. Everything in Windows 98 seems to be working. I'll just get Device Manager up here. Yeah. So I installed the drivers for most of this stuff a while ago. I've got the Sound Blaster Live. So yeah, my next step, I think, is to get some games installed on Windows 98, get Windows XP installed. I'm going to run a kind of a dual boot, kind of a triple boot. With Windows 98, you can just press F8 on boot and boot to DOS. And I've also got DOS 6.2 on here, so I can boot to DOS 7 or DOS 6.2, whichever one I want. And at this point, the only partition that I have on this drive, because I initially partitioned it for DOS, so I've just got a 2 gig partition. That's also what Windows 98 is living on and all it's seeing right now. When I install Windows XP, hopefully it'll just see the rest of the drive and I can partition it for Windows XP. We will check on that in just a minute or two. Hey, so remember when I said the Sound Blaster Live even works in DOS? Well, yeah, screw that. Let me just give you an example of how it actually sounds in DOS here. Let me just get my joystick kind of set up. Listen to this. Probably can't hear that, so I'm gonna move the microphone closer and cut.
I'm Ron Barr for EA Sports. Good night, everyone.
Now, from what I've read, that's actually the FM emulation that it's doing. The Sound Blaster Live does not have a real FM chip on it. And this is kind of one of the pitfalls of trying to set up an all-in-one retro gaming PC. Ideally, you want to try to match the hardware to the era of games you're playing. NHL hockey is a very early 90s game, 91, 92. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put this Sound Blaster 16 that I had in my compact, I'm going to have it in here in the ISA slot, and I'm going to just use both cards. I'll use the Sound Blaster Live for Windows, where the EAX acceleration is going to help. And then I'll just use this Sound Blaster 16 for DOS games, especially earlier DOS games. One quick little thing about this Sound Blaster 16, a lot of people kind of avoid these days because they're considered kind of noisy cards. They also have a few little bugs. This one, I guess, has the chip on it that, from what I've read, it's got the 1703, what is that, the TBS or whatever chip. It's the later chip, the later DSP chip that is noise-free. So this should be a pretty good card. It's green. I may replace it someday with something a little more interesting in color, but for now, I'll get it in there. see what happens with that. All right, so I'm pretty sure I have this figured out. So check this out now. Again, I'll move the mic.
EA Sports presents NHL Hockey.
That's with a real Yamaha FM chip. Just get into some gameplay here. Sounds great. Look at that. Brian Bellows. All right.
I'm Ron Barr for EA Sports. Good night, everyone.
Let's just try another DOS game. Of course, it's obligatory to play a little Doom. In this case, Doom 2, installed off CD. So that's working in DOS. And this again is playing off the Sound Blaster 16. All right. Well, I'm going to call DOS sorted. DOS seems to be working just fine. So I'm going to try installing Windows XP because Windows 98 is already on here. I doubt I'm going to be using it that much. It's really just for the few games that won't run under Windows XP. And I do have a couple of those, but for the most part, I'm going to be using XP. So let me try and get that installed. All right, so Windows XP is now installed. I've got kind of a tri-boot system going here, and I just want to show you that first. So I'm going to just boot here into the boot menu, and I'll show you all three operating systems running. You can use a third-party bootloader that's probably a little more elegant than what I've got on here, but this does work just using the Windows XP bootloader. So if I go to MS-DOS, that's how I'm going to load both DOS and Windows 98. I have to hit F8 right after hitting enter, but I can do it. There we go. And now I'm going to boot to previous version of MS-DOS. That gives me DOS 6.2, which is the version of DOS that the Sound Blaster likes. It didn't like to install the drivers under DOS 7, so I'm just going to use 6.2. It works fine. So here we go. And we're in DOS. I'm not going to show any games because I've already done that, but I'll just reboot and I'll load up Windows 98. All right, so same boot menu, XP boot menu, going to MS-DOS again, but this time I'm not going to hit F8. Just going to let it go. And it goes right into Windows 98. I've got Windows 98 using the Sound Blaster Live, just like Windows XP. For DOS, I'm going to be using the Sound Blaster 16. Right now, I'm going to be manually just switching the cable. There are switch boxes you can buy, and I will buy one. They're cheap. I have one downstairs for my stereo system. I'll probably get one of those, but you know, for now, this setup works. It's just a little inconvenient. Anyway, so that's Windows 98. while I'm here, I'll show you the one Windows 98 game that, well, the one that I know of right now that does not work under XP. And that game is Close Combat. I've shown it before. It does not install under Windows XP. This game runs insane on this computer. It's a dog again on my Pentium 100, but if I can't even leave this on the fastest speed here, which I think is fast. No, fastest. If I do that and then start the game, it's nuts. So, got to turn it down to medium. It's a little more reasonable. Kind of sounds a little more like what it's supposed to sound like. Anyway, that's Windows 98. Let's go back to the boot menu. Get some XP action going. And back here at the boot menu, I'm just going to hit enter for XP. So if you do want to set up a system like this, you just have to install the operating systems in the right order. Start with DOS 6.2, let it create a 2 gig FAT16 partition. It's going to run off that. That's all it's ever going to see, which is fine. Windows 98, install that next. On top of DOS, it's going to let you keep DOS and just install it on that same partition. I mean, you can do something different if you want. I don't need a lot of space for Windows 98, and you know, the speed doesn't really matter when you've got a computer that's this level and with an SSD especially. So FAT16 is fine for that as well. And then I installed Windows XP. It saw all the rest of the drive just like I hoped it would. Installed itself onto its own partition, NTFS partition. It sees Windows 98 and DOS, so I can transfer files back and forth if I want. I can just use like a USB drive. In fact, Windows 98, there's a patch that lets it see USB drives as well. So there's several ways I can transfer files back and forth. The only downside is that Windows XP is on drive E. It's not ideal, but I don't think there's that many programs or games or anything really that care in this era what drive letter they're on, so probably just leave that. If you use Plop or another third-party bootloader, you can get around that and have it be drive C for all operating systems, but I just haven't done that. I just figured this was the most convenient for now. So let's take a look at a couple of Windows XP games. So here's the great SimCity 3000. This is a pretty heavy game, and I tried running it on my Pentium 100, which obviously is kind of a stretch, but it worked, but it was ridiculous. So you really need a computer more like this, something from around the 2000 era. I mean, it's a 1999 game, and it was pushing the hardware at that point, even on its release. So a PC from even a couple years later than that is going to work better. I've got this set up running 1024 by 768. That's why the intro here is in a window. That's my monitor's native resolution, and you'll see it runs really well. This is one of the included cities. I didn't build this, but LGR recently did a video on this game, and I recommend watching that. It's kind of one of those retrospective things that he does, and he's a big fan of it. I was always a big fan of it as well. Let me just zoom in here. So there's still some tiling and stuff like that. This fills in eventually. That's just the game. There's really no amount of hardware you can have that fixes that. So once you're looking at an area for a while, it fills in. But here, let me just start this up. And can we go in any closer? Yeah. Yeah, now we can see the individual Sims, cars, everything. Looks really good, except for these tiles. There may be a patch for that, I don't even know. All of these games that I'm showing you are unpatched. So that's one thing to keep in mind. I'm just kind of installing stuff, making sure everything runs, and then I'll start patching stuff and getting it up to speed after I'm done with this video, which hopefully happens soon. Alright, exit out of this. And I'll just show you one more, just for something a little more advanced. So you've seen DOS games going way back. You've seen Windows 98 games. Now, this is probably the game that's the most advanced of any that I would play on this machine. I probably wouldn't go beyond this. Even this game, my modern PC can play it just fine from the CD version. I do still have actually a Blu-ray drive, 4K Blu-ray drive in my modern PC, so anything that's, I'd say 2004 or later, I'm probably just going to play on my modern PC. But this PC here, I now have to play everything before that. So pretty cool setup. That's why I wanted to do it. And let's check out some Grand Theft Auto Vice City here. So I've got this running at 1024 by 768, and again, unpatched, running on a GeForce 4 Ti 4200. It does seem to struggle a little bit at times, and I kind of remember that. It might be one of the reasons why I decided to upgrade even from this PC. But still runs pretty well. And again, this is pretty much the most modern. This is just loading from the disk, that's why it's chugging like that. This is pretty much the most modern game that I would ever want to run on this machine. So looking around and stuff, looks pretty good. Let's get into a fight. Whoops. Oh, here's some cops. No! I do not want to be busted. That's the worst thing you can be in this game. I'm trying to get the gun. There we go. Now I don't remember how to switch weapons. Let's steal his car. So you see it chugging a little bit. Some of that is loading off the CD. I don't know why. I installed the full game. But basically it runs pretty good. I think there's got to be a patch or something for that. So I think I'm going to end the video there. Everything seems to be working pretty well. I've got all three operating systems, DOS, Windows 98, and Windows XP. Games are running good. Drivers are all installed. Everything sounds good, looks good. So what more could you want? I do still have a tiny bit of instability in Windows 98. I think that might be related to trying to run Smart Drive along with Windows 98 and an SSD or something like that. I'll figure that out later. It's still probably about as stable as Windows 98 ever was. XP and DOS seem to be running just fine. Like I said, retro computing, retro gaming, anything retro pretty much is always going to be a work in progress. Trying to get things kind of set up how you want, running well, you know, all that stuff. This computer right now is running as well as I need it to, as well as I want it to for now. It's no longer going to blow up. It's not a ticking time bomb anymore. I've taken care of that. So that's all I really wanted to do for this video, and now I've got a computer that I can play everything from basically 1980 or 81 up through about 2003 or so, and then I've got my modern PC for everything else. So it's a pretty great setup. Anyway, that's about it for now. As always, thanks for watching.